Please, I'll do anything. Just save my baby girl. Please, you can have the soul of my child. This is when Satan, or the Demon King, would come up. And he would see, well, the baby held by its mother. And he would say, "What is your name, miss?" "My name is Inko Midoriya." "And you would trade your son's life or soul in exchange for your daughter's?" "Yes, I'll do anything." "Well then, okay." And he would take baby Izuku and he would drag him to the depths of hell, giving Inko her child, well, her daughter back in exchange for Izuku. Fast forward 4 years later. I've trained this kid for 4 years. I've also made him the reincarnation of my son, Meliotis. It's a shame. He died a long time ago. What a waste of power. He couldn't defeat me. I had such high expectations. But I guess his reincarnation will. Father, look! I've perfected my fighting style. As the young baby or toddler would go on to punch his father's leg. And it would actually do quite a bit of damage, shocking the Demon King. He would say, "Meliodas, that's not good for you to do. Stop that." And he would flick Meliodas' head. And then he would look at him and say, "Meliodas, today you will be going up to the surface. And you'll be given back to your mother, Inko. Your job will be to do whatever you see to that world as you see fit. Do you understand?" "What do you mean?" "Father, what do you mean? Where am I going? Will I have to leave you?" "Yes, Meliodas, you will have to leave me. Now, goodbye." As the Demon King sends Meliodas, or Izuku, whichever one you want to call him, back to Inko. And he would be in his sister's bed. When Inko gets home with Izumi, she would say, "Izumi, go take a shower and get dressed. We're gonna have dinner." And Izumi would say, "Yes, ma'am," as she runs up to the bathroom, takes a shower, then walks to her room to get dressed. As she would see the young boy in her bed and scream, alerting her mother, Inko. As she would walk into Izumi's room, seeing a young yellow-haired boy with weird clothing on. And she would go to wake him up. As Izuku would get up, he'd be startled, and he'd get into a fighting position. He'd say, "Who are you?" And Inko would be confused, and she'd say, "No, who are you? You just popped up here. Why are you in my daughter's room?" And Izumi would co-sign, saying, "Yeah, why are you in my room?" And Deku would look at her, or he would look at Inko, and he would say, My father, the Demon King, he said that I would be sent back to my mother. And Inko would say, wait, the, the Demon King sent you here? And Deku would say, yeah. And he said I'd be sent to my mother. So I'm assuming you're my mom. And Inko would look at Deku, and she would hug him, apologizing for giving him to that bad man. And Deku would say, wait, what? He wasn't a bad man. He trained me. He was my father. How dare you say that? And he would look at Inka with a face of anger. And Izumi would step in saying, don't talk to my mother that way. And she would go to use her pyrokinesis on Deku that she just learned that she had. But Deku would say, you're weak. And he would slap away her hand, putting a shocked expression on Izumi's face. And when he looked back at Inko, he said, don't ever talk about my father in that manner again. Or else. And he would walk out of the room, seemingly confused because he doesn't know where he is, but he does know he's in some type of house. So Meliotis or Izuku would walk back into the room and say, where am I supposed to go now? And Inko would smile a bit, seeing that Izuku's face is still as bright as ever. And she would say, come on, right in here. As she would lead Deku to his room. And she'd say, this is where you'll be staying. And I'm sorry for saying that your father was a bad man. It was my fault. You were sent with him. And Deku is puzzled by what she's saying, but he shrugs it off and lays on his bed. Deku then goes on to think to himself, what a day. First I trained with my father, and now I'm here. Guess I'll go to sleep. And Deku would go to sleep, missing out on dinner and interacting with his family. The next day, Inko would come into his room, saying, Izuku, Meliotis, wake up. And Meliotis would turn over and get up. And it'd say, what is it? And Inko would say, you have to go to school. And Deku would say, school? What is that? Inko would then go on to explain that it's a place that Deku will learn things at. And Deku says, my bad guys, I'm back. But Inko would say, yeah, you have to go to school. And Deku would say, what's the point? I'm all knowing. And Inko would say, what do you mean? As Deku would then go on to say that his father taught him everything that he needed to know, as he taught him fighting styles as well. And Inko would shrug that off and say, that doesn't matter. A kid like you should go to school. And Deku would say, alright then, let's go. As he would get up, throw on the clothes that he had, and go to school. Once they got there, Inko would say, alright, you two have a good day. as Izumi and Deku got out of the car and they walked into school. Deku would walk into the class along with Izumi, and Izumi would say, "Alright, Deku, you're gonna have to introduce yourself. Don't be shy." And Deku says, "Alright, little sister." As he would walk into the classroom, and the teacher would see him and say, "Oh, you must be Izuku Midoriya." And Deku would say, "Is that the name that my mother gave me?" And the teacher would say, "Yeah, it is. Is there something wrong with that name?" And Deku would say, "Yeah, it is." As he would say, "Hi, my name is Meliotis. Meliodas Midoriya. Nice to meet you all. Oh, and also, I'm the son of the Demon King." And everybody would look at him, and they'd all laugh. If you don't stop lying, we all know that the Demon King is just some myth that our parents tell us so that we'll behave. And Deku would say, "No, he's not a myth. He's my father." And this is when Bakugo would stand up and he'd say, "Kid, I could have sworn that we told you to stop talking lies." And Deku would look at Bakugo, and then he would look at Izumi, and he'd say, "Izumi, who is that?" And Bakugo would say, "Shut up, kid, I'm talking to you." And once Deku was interrupted rudely by Bakugo, he would see that Bakugo's hands are sparking. And he'd say, "Oh, you have a quirk. And it looks like you've just got it." And Bakugo would say, "Yeah, what about it?" Deku would look at him and say, "I think I'm going to teach you a lesson." And remember, this is a 4-year-old Deku along with everybody else. Everybody else is 4, just like him. And he finna beat the shit out of Bakugo. But that doesn't matter. So Deku would walk over to Bakugo, and Bakugo's sparks would start to get a little bit bigger. And he would try to explode Deku, but this wouldn't even affect Deku. Deku would grab Bakugo's throat, and he would look him dead in the eye, and then slam him to the ground and begin punching him until Bakugo's face was completely bloody. And he would say, "If you ever try to step to me again, I'll kill you." And the teacher would be absolutely shocked at this, along with everybody else in the classroom. And he would say, "Well, Deku, or Meliodas, please take your seat." And Meliodas would get up and he'd go over to a chair next to Izumi, and he'd sit down and he'd smile at her. And he'd say, "It's all in a day's work." As Bakugo's bloodied body is carried to the nurse, Deku would be smiling and sort of laughing. But as the day goes on and eventually ends, Deku would walk home with Izumi. Once they got home, Deku and Izumi opened the door, and they saw that Bakugo's mom was with Inko. And Inko looks at Deku with a firm face, and she would say, "Why did you beat up Bakugo?" And Mitsuki would be looking even angrier. as she walked over to Deku and slapped him. And Inko wouldn't say anything. She would still be looking angry at Deku. As Deku looked at Mitsuki and he smacked her back. But he smacked her 10 times harder, sending her head into a wall. And he would look at her body on the ground, saying that, "I never said that you could touch me, woman." And he would walk over her body straight to his mother. And Inko would look at him and say, "Why did you do that?" As she would smack Deku. But Deku would turn to look at her and she would say, or he would say, "I thought I said I didn't give you permission, or any of you permission to touch me. The only reason that I'm not gonna smack the hell out of you is because you're my mother. But if you do it again, so God help me, I'm gonna smack the ever-loving fuck out of you." As he looks at Inko, and his eyes would go black. And he'd say, "Now, the reason I beat the hell out of that little boy is because he tried to step to me. And he tried to explode my face. And that's not very nice, now is it?" As Inko would say, "Oh, Bakugo tried to attack you? Well, that doesn't sound like him at all." But Izumi would interject and she would say, "Yeah, Mom. Bakugo was being arrogant and he tried to explode Deku's face because he said he was the son of the Demon King." And Inko would say, "Oh, that makes sense. Well, Deku, kids think that the Demon King is a myth." As Deku would say, "Well, he's not. And they should learn that." As Deku would walk away from Inko and go up to his room and eventually fall asleep. Fast forward 10 years, Deku is now 14. And Deku has pretty much been training in those 10 years. And he's perfected a technique that he calls revenge counter. But he can only do that once. But he also has another technique that he perfected called full counter, that he can basically use all the time. And Deku would get memories from his former life. And these are the memories that taught him this. And Deku would say, "I can't believe I learned all of this in only 10 years. Feel like I should have learned more." Is Deku would walk to school on his last day with Izumi. And he'd say, "Izumi, what do you think we're gonna do today?" As Izumi would say, "I don't really know. But I hope we don't have to do that much work, because, to be honest, it's gonna be so boring." As Deku would look at her and say, "Yeah, you're right. It would be pretty boring to have to do work on our last day of school." As they both get to their school and walk into their class, they would take their seats as Bakugo would be glaring at Deku. The teacher would then walk in and say, "Well, this is you guys' last day. I think y'all should start thinking about your future and start thinking about what you guys want to do." As everybody would see the stack of papers in his hand and groan. as the teacher would say, "Psych," and throw the papers into the air and say that I know that all of you want to go to the hero school, as everybody would then start cheering, and Bakugo would stand up and say, "Don't lump me in with these losers. They're not as strong as me. I'm the strongest, and I'll be the only one making it into UA." As Bakugo would look at Izumi, and he'd say, "Especially her. She's too weak to even compare to me. Her and her brother." As Deku would be zoned out, not even listening to this conversation. The teacher would try to settle Bakugo down, but Bakugo would intently be staring at Izumi and Deku, as Izumi would get up and say, "Bakugo, you know I'm stronger than you. Stop playing these foolish games and sit down. Nobody needs your outburst today." As this would only make Bakugo angrier, as he says, "What's wrong with you? You're a loser just like your brother." As Deku would still be zoned out, as Izumi would look over at Deku, and Bakugo would say, don't look over there for help. You're facing me. In fact, your brother's a bigger loser than you are." As he would walk over to Deku's desk and pick up his notebook, start flipping through it, and then he'd say, "Oh, Deku." As Deku would still be zoned out, Bakugo would say, "I know you hear me." And this would piss Bakugo all the way off, and he would explode Deku's notebook, snapping Deku back into reality to see that his notebook was just exploded. He would see all of the pages that he worked so hard on, gathering quirks and information so that he could learn a little bit more about this world. He just saw it all be destroyed by Bakugo. His Deku would stand up and he'd smile and he'd laugh to himself. As Bakugo would say, "What are you laughing at, you damn loser?" Deku's demon mark would pop up as he would grab Bakugo by his throat, and he'd say, "Do you remember this position, Bakugo? I did it to you 10 years ago. I beat the hell out of you 10 years ago, and you still don't remember. You don't remember that you shouldn't fuck with me, Bakugo." As Deku would drop Bakugo, and he'd say, "Die," as he'd punch Bakugo directly in the face, breaking his nose on impact, sending Bakugo through the classroom, out of a wall. He'd go straight through the wall and land on the outside ground, as Deku would jump out of the massive hole that Bakugo created, and he would land on the ground. And he'd say, "Get up, Bakugo, get up." As Bakugo would be struggling to get up, seeing that he has a broken nose. When Bakugo finally stands up, he sees that Deku is gone. But then he appears right in his face, and he kicks Bakugo in the stomach, sending him flying again. But then Deku would jump into the air, and then as Bakugo was flying, Deku would jump on him, and then keep jumping on him, until you can hear Bakugo's bones physically crack, and him scream out in pain, trying to get Deku off of him by exploding him. But this wouldn't work, and it would only make Deku smiled more and more until he decided to finish the fight by absolutely pummeling Bakugo with a barrage of punches. And he would then go over to Bakugo and spit on his head, and then pick him up by his hair and knee him in the face 3 times. And then he'd look at his face and say, should I knee you even more? I think I should. As he grabs Bakugo's face and fucking knees him in the face 5 more times. And he'd say, I think you're bloody enough. And then he throws him on the ground. And then he starts punching him and punching him and punching him until the pro heroes are called. And he's eventually ripped off of Bakugo, who is left bloodied and mangled. But he is picked up and sent to the infirmary. And All Might was one of the people that came to rip Deku off. And he'd say, what the hell were you thinking, kid? And Deku would only smile more. And All Might would see this, and he'd say, what are you smiling about? I finally put that damn Bakugo in his place. And All Might would say, what? What are you talking about? Why did you do that to him? As Deku would say, he destroyed my notebook. And All Might would say, a notebook? You beat him up over a notebook? It wasn't a regular notebook, All Might. Think. Damn it. As he would go on to say that he destroyed a notebook that was priceless. It could have been worth millions, even trillions of dollars. It had so many quirks in it, so many heroes, like quirk information, things on heroes that people didn't even know, things that were kept in the dark, their advantages, their disadvantages, things about this entire world, just in that book. So many different things that could be explored just in that one book. And Bakugo destroyed it. As he would look at Izumi and say, come on, we're leaving. As All Might would say, you're not going anywhere, kid, until you pay for that crime. As Deku would look deep into All Might's eyes and he'd say, stop me. As he would get up along with Izumi and walk out. As Izumi would turn back and she'd stick up a L and she'd say, loser, as she'd walk home with Deku. Once they got home, Inko would try to bother Deku about what he did, but Izuku wouldn't be having it. And he would begin walking up the stairs until Inko would say, the damn bastard. What did he teach my son? As Deku would appear right in front of Inko. And he would say, don't act innocent. I know what you did. As Deku would then go on to walk upstairs and lay down in his bed as he would drift off to sleep. But Deku wouldn't be dreaming. He would be sucked into his mindscape. And he'd say, what am I doing here? As he would see a boy or a person that looked exactly like him. And he'd say, who are you? And the figure would say, I'm Meliotis. And Deku would say, Meliotis? You're me. As Meliotis would say, no, you're me. My father made you exactly like me. He changed your genetics so that you could be me. You're my exact reincarnation. And my father trapped me in your body, which is why I'm here now. And Deku would say, what? My father trapped you here? I'm your reincarnation. What are you talking about? As Meliodas would give Deku the whole rundown on what has happened. He'd say that he died and his father was very angry that he couldn't defeat him. And he'd say that Meliodas was, he'd say that he was a powerhouse. Too strong for even his father, but he died for love. And Deku would say, love? What are you talking about? As Meliodas would look at him and say, that doesn't matter. What does matter is the fact that I'm going to be training you for a little bit. And Deku would say, training me? And what? As Meliodas would then go on to say that he will be training Deku in his sword style. He will also be getting his sword, Lost Vein. As Deku would say, well then, alright, is that all? As Meliodas would say, no, that's not all. You also have a curse on you that my father gave you. And Deku would say, curse? What are you talking about? It looks like you have the same curses. Me. No, you don't. This curse is different. It's better, but worse. Looks like you'll, every time that you find true love, or at least you think you find true love, your girlfriend or mate will break your heart, and they would leave you for your closest friend. And Deku would say, what? How is that better? And Meliodas would say, well, my curse was if my lover found out her past, she would die in a few days. And Deku would say, oh, well, I guess that's better. But what is that for exactly? Like, why did I need to know that? What'll happen? And Meliodas would say, you'll see in time, but when this does happen, try not to lose control. As Meliodas would disappear and Deku would wake up confused. But he shrugged it off and he went back to sleep. For the next 10 months, Deku would begin training with Meliodas. And in the process, he met a girl named Uraraka, that he became very fond of. And he began to like her as she began to like him back. And after 5 months, they began dating. And this would please Meliodas because he would want Deku to experience this pain at least once so that Deku could unlock his assault mode because Deku cannot unlock his assault mode unless he feels immense anger, hatred, sadness, or pain. And so, after the 10 months, Deku would go to the UA exam along with Izumi and Uraraka would be teasing the both of them about being in love. And Deku would elbow Izumi in the stomach saying, "Knock it off," as Izumi would laugh under her breath. As they would make it to UA and they would go in, as they would take the written exam and all of them would ace it. And then they would take the practical exam. As once they got in there, President Mike explained everything. As Deku would try to walk over to Uraraka, but a guy named Ida would get in his way. And he'd say, "I don't think you should bother her right now. I feel like she should focus." And Deku would say, "Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. My name's Meliotis. Nice to meet you." As Ida would say, "Hi, my name's Ida. Ida Tinya. Nice to meet you. I look forward to learning with you as well as becoming student body president." As Deku would say, "Wow, you're very ambitious." As President Mike would then say, "Go," as Ida would take off along with everybody else. But Deku would just walk out. And President Mike would say, "Kid, what are you doing? Go!" As Deku would say, "Don't worry, I'll still have the highest score here. I just want to give everybody a little bit of time before I do what I am about to do." As he thinks to himself, "Thanks, Meliodas." As he walks out and Deku purposely gets beaten up by all of the fucking robots that are in the area, as the heroes would be confused at what he's doing. And as they saw this, Deku would have a smile on his face and his demon mark would appear. And he'd say, he'd scream this, "If you don't want to die, run away." As everybody would hear this, and they would see the amount of energy coming off of Deku. As Izumi would say, "Everybody, go! Go! He's about to do something really big." As everybody would start to run back, as Deku would say, "Revenge counter." As a sword would appear in his hand, and he would swing it. As a large burst of energy would fly out in every direction, destroying the city along with every robot, including the zero pointers. And President Mike would then go on to say that the test was over and all of the heroes, especially Nezu and All Might, would be shocked because Nezu didn't think that anybody had this ability, or at least he's never seen anybody with this ability. But All Might was shocked because this is the same boy from 10 years ago, but he seems stronger. As Deku would say, "Well, that's much better. I've been needing to relieve some stress," as he would walk off of the battlefield. And everybody would be in shock, basically. As a day later, Deku, Izumi, and Uraraka would get their letters. And they would all pass. And so, basically, the next day, they go to UA. And once they walk into the doors, they see that Ida is arguing with Bakugo. As Bakugo would say, "Damn, Four Eyes, leave me alone." As Ida would look at Deku and he'd say, "Oh, Deku." Or, not Deku, Meliotis. As he would walk up to Meliotis and he'd say, "Hi, what's going on?" He says, "That kid Bakugo is being arrogant and he's not following the school rules." As this commotion would wake up Aizawa, as he would get up and say, "Take your seats. It took you guys way too long to get quiet. Now, sit down so we can begin," as he would rub his head. And he would say, "Alright, today we're going to be doing an exam, the quirk assessment to be exact." As he would say, "Put on these and go outside." As everybody would walk to the locker rooms and they would put on the outfits. When Deku took off his shirt, everybody would see the mark of a dragon marked on the back of his neck. Yes, instead of Deku's mark being on his arm, I'm gonna have it on his neck. Yeah, but everybody would see this and they'd all question what it was. But Deku just shrugged it off and say, "It's been there ever since he was born." But they would also be surprised at Deku being so muscular. They would all see his appearance and Kirishima would say, "Wow, you're really manly." As Deku would say, "Thanks. I've worked hard for this with my father. Oh, and my, well, brother, you could call him." As he would be referring to Meliodas. As once they got on their outfits, they would all go outside. As once they got out there, they would do the test or the assessment. As Deku would come in first in everything, Izumi would come in first in, no, she would come in second in everything, and Bakugo would come in third. The only thing that Deku tied in was the ball throw, because Uraraka got infinity just like him. And so, once the day ends, they all go home. Fast forward the next day, they walk into class, and Aizawa is already up. And he says, "Take your seats. Today, we'll be going to the USJ." And everybody would be confused. "What is the USJ?" they would all ask. Aizawa would go on to explain that the USJ is where they will be training their quirks and trying to get stronger, because in a few weeks they will have a sports festival, and this is where they will fight and try to get recognized by agencies. And so everybody would understand this, and so they would all get ready and they'd go to the USJ. Once they got there, they'd meet up with 13, and she or he, I don't fucking know, they would explain that the USJ is basically where they'd be training their quirks, and they would show them all of the facilities that they had. And Kirishima would walk up and he'd say, Oh, that's so awesome. You guys even have fake villains? As 13 would say, no, we don't have fake villains. What are you talking about? As they would turn around and they would see a bunch of portals opening up and all sorts of villains walking out. As Meliodas would smile and his demon mark would come upon his face and he'd say, Aizawa, I'll end this quick. As he'd say, Demon's Wrath. As a bunch of balls of darkness would begin to spread out everywhere. As Deku would say, follow my commands and kill all of them. As the dark orbs would start to pierce all of the villains, killing them instantly. And this is when Shigaraki would say, what's going on? As he would see all of the villains dying. As he'd say, call out the Nomu. As Kirigiri would say, yes sir, yes sir. As he transport the Nomu to the USJ. As the Nomu would come out and Deku would say, you really think that can stop these orbs? As the orbs would fly through the Nomu, tearing it apart. But the Nomu would just reform at Deku's surprise. And so Deku would say, I think I'll deal with this personally. As everybody is shocked, including Aizawa and 13, that Deku just killed all of these villains with no remorse. He didn't even think twice about it. As Aizawa thinks to himself, I'm glad he's on our side. If he was a villain, he could be really dangerous. As we go back to Deku, Deku jumps off the balcony and he lands on the ground softly. As he would then dart at the Nomu, sword in hand. As the Nomu would throw a punch, but Deku would cut off his hand and he'd say, I know where your weak spot is. As he'd say, Meliotis, I've created an even better version of this. 10 trillion divine cuts. As a bunch of slashes would come upon the Nomu's body. And it would cut the brain of the Nomu, killing it instantly. And Deku would say, it's done. As he would then look at Shigaraki and Kirigiri, and he would throw his sword at Shigaraki. But Shigaraki would dodge it. But it'd still leave a pretty big cut on the side of his face. And Shigaraki would say, you cheater! You cheater! As he would look at Deku, smiling, saying, how'd I cheat? This isn't a game. It's real life. As Shigaraki would say, Kirigiri, get us out of here. As Kirigiri would say, yes, sir. As they would then leave. Once they left, the pro heroes weren't called because Ida never left to go get All Might. And so they continue on with their day as planned. But more suspicion was grown upon Deku. Including, well, the main one who was suspicious about Deku, like, really suspicious on how he learned the things he learned was Izumi. She didn't understand how Deku was progressing so fast. She wondered who taught him these things. Because she was training with him the whole time. And she never saw Deku use a technique like this once. This would also kind of confuse Uraraka in the same way. But they would both kind of shrug it off and continue training. Once the day ended, they would all get a week off of school. And in this week, Ida and Deku have kind of become pretty good friends. They would even say best friends, knowing that Meliotis, the real Meliotis, knowing that Ida will possibly be the one to betray Deku, is smiling in Deku's head, thinking that I wonder how Deku will fare against this opponent or this obstacle in his life. I really want to see his assault mode. As Deku would, or the real, as we cut back to Deku, hanging out with Ida and Uraraka. As Deku would say, well, you guys, I think it's getting pretty late. We should all go home. As they pretty much go from the park to their homes. This is when a knock would be at Izuku's door. As Izumi would answer it, and it would be Aizawa and Nezu. They would be asking the students, well, if they could come to the dorms. Oh, and by the way, Mirio got one for all. Yeah, Mirio. And so, yeah, Inko would come to the door and she would be told about the dorms and how the students were attacked. And she would think this was the best plan for them. So they would go to the dorms. Once they got there, however, Deku would think to himself, I wonder what I'm going to do for Uraraka in my anniversary. I really love her. She's been there for me in my darkest times, really. But I don't know what I'm going to do for her. She deserves something special. As Deku would think to himself and he would say, I got it. I'll get her a diamond ring. Probably the biggest diamond I can find her. As Deku would then go out, not even unpacking. And he would go to a jewelry store where he would see that they would have a huge diamond ring for sale. Only $890. And Deku would say, can I buy this? As the cashier would say, sure. Do you have the money? As Deku would say, yeah, just put it on my card. As they would swipe Deku's card and it would go through. Deku would then get the ring bagged up and the cashier would ask, so what special lady will be getting this ring? As Deku would say, my girlfriend, Uraraka. As the cashier would say, well then, good luck. As Deku would kind of run out of the store and go home. Well, not home, go to the dorms. Where he would see everybody sitting in the common area with a shocked expression on all of their faces. As Deku would see that Uraraka was kissing Ida. As Izumi would see Deku's expression along with everybody else. And Deku would say, Uraraka, what are you doing? As she would look at Deku, and she'd say, "You just weren't enough. You're so lame compared to him." As she would look at Ida, as he would look at Ida, smiling, as he was kissing Uraraka and taking pictures while he was doing it. And once they were done kissing, he would post that he's kissing his best friend's girlfriend. And everybody would get alerted that Ida just sent this to all of them. And it would get a few likes. Not from them, but from different people calling him a stud and a player. As Deku would walk over to Izumi and give her the ring and say that he loves her, and he hugged her. And he'd say, "You keep that for when you get married to a nice guy. Tell him to propose to you with it." Oh, and he kissed her on the forehead. My bad. We're not doing no incest stuff around here. But well, it'll happen eventually, but yeah. So once Deku explains this to her, Izumi would say, yeah. As Deku's mark would start to grow across his body. As his shirt would come off. As it would begin to grow even more. Until Deku's smile just got larger and larger. And he began to get angry. And he would say, "Ida, I'm going to beat you until you can't even breathe." And Ida would look at Deku's expression, and it would kind of be emotionless until Deku's form actually stopped and it settled on this, and his face got serious. And he looked at Ida, and he darted at him at extreme speeds, as the real Meliodas in Deku's head is smiling and laughing, thinking to himself, he's gonna want revenge on his father. Or our father. As Deku would punch Ida, sending him to a wall, cracking it, alerting all of the heroes. As Deku would begin to beat the hell out of Ida until he would stop, realizing what happened. And he would smile, and he'd say, "Ida, stand up." As Ida would get up, he'd say, "What the hell? What were you thinking? Why did you do that?" As Deku would say, "I'm sorry. It's my father's fault. He put this curse on me. And he will be the one to pay." As Deku would walk out of the room. But I'm going to be leaving this off right here. It's just about an hour. Oh, and by the way, I would like for you guys to go subscribe to this kid. Or this guy. Hold on. Go subscribe to this guy. I've been watching his videos and they're actually amazing, yo. Like I'm not even gonna lie. They're actually amazing. Like the way they're scripted, it's actually amazing. But yeah, go subscribe to him. I like him. I think y'all would like him. But yeah. Bye.